This is a voice test for a history documentary. In the shadows of empire, ordinary lives changed forever. The bridge stood where the river bent like a tired spine, iron ribs stretching across slow dark water, its faded paint holding the memory of a color that once tried to be green. In daylight, the place felt ordinary, a simple crossing between two quiet neighborhoods at the edge of a mid-sized American town where diners opened before sunrise and porch lights stayed glowing long after midnight. But after sunset, the bridge changed in ways no one could clearly explain. Sound carried strangely there, footsteps echoing longer than they should, wind slipping through the metal rails with a whisper that felt almost intentional, as if the structure itself were listening. People crossed quickly at night, not because of danger anyone could name, but because silence gathered in a way that felt too aware, too patient, too present. And 3 nights ago someone had been seen standing at the very center of that silence. Still, unmoving, facing the water below. That someone was Aloan Pike. Not a name most neighbors knew well, though they recognized her careful wave when she passed the corner grocery, the same small store where the bell above the door rang softer than expected, like a sound trying not to disturb the air. Aloan had lived in town for just under 11 months, long enough to become familiar, not long enough to become understood. She rented the narrow blue house at the end of Alder Street, the one with the slightly leaning mailbox and the quiet yard where grass grew evenly but never wildly, as if even the ground respected her need for order. Inside the house everything stayed neat, almost staged, books aligned by height, dishes washed immediately, curtains drawn at the same hour each evening. Order gave her quiet. Quiet gave her distance. And distance helped keep certain memories from speaking too loudly. At least, that had been the plan when she arrived. Most mornings she walked to the small medical clinic where she worked the early record shift, arriving before the sun fully cleared the water tower painted with the town name in peeling white letters. She liked early hours because fewer voices meant fewer questions, and fewer questions meant no one noticing the way she sometimes paused in the hallway as if listening for something no one else could hear. No one at the clinic knew much about her past, only that she had transferred from somewhere farther north after paperwork described a personal relocation. In towns like this, silence was a kind of agreement. People did not ask if routines remained steady. And Aloan's routines never changed. Until the night of the cry. It was close to midnight when the sound first reached the houses near the river. Not loud, not sharp, but stretched thin with something that felt painfully human. Some later described it as a call for help. Others said it sounded like grief pulled too tight across the dark. One neighbor turned on a porch light and waited. Another stepped outside and searched the empty street. A third listened from behind a locked door and whispered to herself that it was only wind bending through metal. Within minutes the sound was gone. Silence returned thicker than before, settling over rooftops and trees like something heavy but unseen. By morning the town had already begun the quiet work of forgetting. Except someone had seen a figure on the bridge. Standing at the center. Facing the water. Not moving even after the sound faded. A delivery driver passing along the far road mentioned it casually while paying for coffee at the diner, the kind of small detail that should have disappeared with the steam rising from his cup. But the waitress remembered. She always remembered small things, especially when they felt misplaced inside ordinary days. By noon, the story had traveled softly through grocery aisles, clinic corridors, and slow conversations that fill towns where nothing is supposed to happen. No one spoke Aloan Pike's name out loud. Not yet. Because certainty had not arrived. Only unease. That same afternoon Aloan followed her usual path home, moving along sidewalks lined with maple trees whose leaves had begun turning the color of rusted coins. She carried a paper bag with soup and bread, a simple meal chosen more from habit than hunger. When she reached Alder Street she paused for a moment, her eyes drifting toward the distant outline of the bridge barely visible between rooftops and branches. From where she stood the structure looked harmless, almost fragile, like something incapable of holding secrets. Her gaze lingered longer than usual. Then she stepped inside the blue house and closed the door with careful quiet. Across town the diner filled with the low hum of afternoon conversation, plates sliding across counters, coffee pouring in steady dark streams. Someone mentioned the midnight sound again. Someone else laughed and blamed coyotes wandering too close to town. But the waitress did not laugh. She had grown up near rivers. and she knew the difference between an animal call and something shaped by sorrow. She wiped the counter slowly, listening to voices trying too hard to sound normal. Outside, a police cruiser rolled past without urgency, just another routine patrol tracing familiar streets. Nothing official had been reported. No emergency call. No missing person. Only a sound. And a figure no one could fully describe. Evening settled gently, porch lights blinking on one by one, small stars arranged by habit rather than wonder. Inside her house, Aloan sat at the kitchen table without turning on the television. The room stayed dim except for the soft yellow glow above the sink. In front of her rested an unopened envelope, edges worn as if it had traveled farther than the return address suggested. She had received it that morning. No note. No explanation. Only her name written in careful ink. She had not touched it since. Minutes passed. Then more. Finally her fingers moved toward the envelope, stopping just before contact, her breath slowing as though whatever waited inside might shift the shape of the room itself. Instead she pulled her hand back. Some memories remain quiet only when unopened. Outside the night deepened, wind moving through trees, distant cars fading from the roads as the town settled into the fragile peace it trusted too easily. Near the river the bridge waited in darkness, metal cooling beneath a wide empty sky, water sliding silently below. For a long time nothing happened. Then sometime past midnight a single light appeared at the far end of the bridge. Not bright. Just enough to reveal the outline of someone stepping onto the iron walkway. Slow steps. Measured. As if each movement required permission from the silence around them. Halfway across, the figure stopped. The river reflected nothing. The town slept. And once again silence gathered. Back on Alder Street, Aloan's eyes opened suddenly in the dark, breath sharp as though pulled from a dream she could not remember. She listened. At first there was nothing. Only the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Then, carried across distance and water, something thin and breaking, almost a voice. Her body stilled, every muscle caught between recognition and denial. Because some sounds belong to the present, and others travel from places long buried. The cry faded quickly, leaving the night untouched. But Aloan did not move. She already knew something the rest of the town did not. Something about the bridge. About the sound. About why silence then never felt empty. Far away, unseen by anyone awake, the figure at the center of the bridge turned slightly toward the dark water below, as if listening for an answer that had taken years to return. Morning would come soon. Questions would follow slowly. And the town would begin to notice that ordinary routines were shifting in ways too quiet to explain. Because the real mystery was not only who stood on the bridge, but why the sound of that midnight cry felt familiar to someone who had spent nearly a year trying to forget the past entirely. And the most troubling question had not yet been asked. If Aloan Pike already knew what waited at the silent bridge, why had she come to this town in the first place? Morning arrived gently, the way it always did in this town, light spreading slowly across rooftops as if careful not to wake anything too suddenly. From a distance the river looked calm, carrying yesterday away without question, reflecting a sky that promised nothing unusual. But quiet places often hide the deepest changes. Aloan Pike did not sleep again after the sound faded. She remained in bed staring at the ceiling where faint shadows from tree branches moved like slow water across white paint. Her breathing stayed shallow, controlled, the practiced rhythm of someone who had learned long ago that emotion could grow dangerous if allowed too much space. When the alarm finally sounded, she turned it off before the second tone, already awake, already tired. Routine waited for her the way it always did. Shower. Coffee. Plain toast she barely tasted. Every movement precise. Every second measured. Yet something inside the morning felt misaligned, like a clock ticking half a beat too slow. She noticed it most in the silence. Not the normal quiet she depended on, but a heavier stillness, as if the night had followed her into daylight. Outside, Alder Street looked unchanged. A neighbor watering flowers. A distant lawn mower beginning its slow circle. A delivery truck pausing at the corner. Ordinary details arranged to suggest safety. Aloan stepped onto the sidewalk and began her walk toward the clinic, keeping the same steady pace she always used. Halfway down the block she felt it. Not a sound. Not a movement. Only the sensation of being remembered by something she could not see. Her steps did not slow, but her hands tightened slightly around the strap of her bag. By the time she reached the main road, traffic noise had returned, washing the feeling away like shallow rain. Still, the echo remained somewhere beneath thought. At the clinic, the fluorescent lights hummed softly, a sound most people never noticed. Aloan always noticed. She greeted the front desk with a small nod, voice quiet, expression calm. No one mentioned the midnight cry. No one mentioned the bridge. But conversations paused a fraction too long when she passed, the way curiosity hides behind politeness in small communities. She sat at her workstation and began sorting patient files, numbers, and names forming the protective wall she relied on. Paperwork had rules. Memories did not. For nearly 2 hours everything felt almost normal. Then the phone rang at the reception desk. A short call. Low voice. Few words. The receptionist glanced toward Aloan before quickly looking away. That glance lasted less than a second. But it was enough. Because Aloan understood glances. Understood the language of things people tried not to say. Minutes later the clinic director approached her desk, posture careful, tone gentle in the way people use when they are unsure what news might do. There had been a report, he explained quietly. Nothing official. Nothing urgent. Just someone claiming they saw a woman on the bridge again before dawn. Standing still. Facing the water. Aloan listened without changing expression. She asked only one question. What time? The director hesitated, then answered. 12:43. A precise number. Too precise to ignore. Because Aloan had checked the clock beside her bed when the sound reached her room. 12:43. Silence filled the space between them. The director added that police were not concerned. Probably insomnia. Probably someone passing through. Probably nothing. Probably. Aloan thanked him softly and returned to her files. Her hands moved correctly. Her breathing stayed even. But numbers on the page began to blur, lines drifting apart like memory losing shape. 12:43. The same time. Again. Across town the diner buzzed with late-morning customers, coffee refilled, plates stacked, conversations circling the same quiet mystery. The waitress who remembered everything listened more than she spoke. Patterns mattered to her. And repetition mattered even more. 2 nights. Same bridge. Same still figure. Same hour. That was not nothing. Back at the clinic Aloan requested to leave early, blaming a headache she did not need to pretend. No one argued. Outside the sky had turned pale grey, clouds gathering without urgency. She did not walk home. Instead her steps carried her in the opposite direction, towards streets she had carefully avoided for 11 months. Toward the river. Each block felt longer than it should. Each sound sharper. As if the town itself were watching her return to a place she had promised herself never to see again. When the bridge finally appeared between bare branches, her pace slowed for the first time. Distance did not soften its presence. In daylight, the structure looked older than memory, metal worn smooth by years of weather and footsteps. Nothing about it suggested mystery. Nothing except the feeling rising quietly in her chest. A recognition without welcome. She stopped several yards away, close enough to see the center where the figure had been reported. Empty now. Only rust-colored stains and scattered gravel. Ordinary. Completely ordinary. Yet her breathing grew uneven, pulled by something deeper than sight. Because she had stood there once before. Not 3 nights ago. Long before she came to this town. Long before she chose silence as protection. A memory pressed forward, slow and unwanted. Cold air. Dark water. Another voice in the night. She forced the image back, jaw tightening, eyes closing briefly until the present returned. When she opened them again, someone was standing at the far end of the bridge. Not the midnight figure. Just an older man holding a fishing pole, watching the river with patient stillness. Relief should have followed. But it did not. Because the fear was never about strangers. It was about what the bridge remembered. Aloan turned away before the memory could deepen and walked back toward town, Steps quicker now, almost urgent. Behind her the river moved without sound. Above it the bridge waited, unchanged, holding secrets in plain daylight. By afternoon rain began to fall, light at first, then steady enough to blur windows and soften edges. Inside her blue house Aloan finally picked up the unopened envelope from the kitchen table. Her fingers trembled slightly, the first visible crack in the control she carried everywhere. She turned it over. No return address she recognized. No explanation. Only her name. Written by someone who knew exactly where to find her. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the sky. Inside, the room felt suddenly smaller. She opened the envelope. One sheet of paper. No greeting. No signature. Just a single sentence. Asterisk asterisk, you left before the truth reached the water asterisk asterisk. Her breath stopped. Not because of the words alone, but because she recognized the handwriting. A past she believed buried. A voice she thought time had erased. The room tilted slightly, memory rushing back faster than she could contain it. The bridge. The night. The sound that was never supposed to return. Rain struck the windows harder now, each drop sharp as a question. Aloan folded the paper slowly, carefully, as if speed might break something fragile inside her. Because the message meant only one thing. Whoever stood on that bridge at 12:43 was not a stranger, and the past she had run from had finally found her ago. Rain stayed through the night, steady and patient, turning streets into long mirrors of broken light. Inside the blue house, Aloan Pike did not move from the kitchen chair for a long time. The single sentence on the folded paper rested in front of her like something alive, something breathing quietly, waiting for her to look again. She already knew every curve of the handwriting, knew the pressure of each letter, knew the past it carried. Some memories fade with distance, others only wait. Thunder rolled far away, too distant to feel dangerous, yet close enough to remind her how quickly calm could disappear. Her chest tightened slowly, not panic, not yet, just the careful warning her body had learned to send before everything else followed. She stood at last and carried the paper to the sink, holding it above the metal basin as if water alone might erase what it meant. But she did not turn on the faucet, because truth does not dissolve so easily. Instead, she folded the note again, smaller this time, and placed it inside a drawer she had never used. Out of sight. Not out of mind. Sleep never came. Morning arrived grey and heavy, clouds hanging low over the river as though the sky itself were listening. At the clinic her absence did not go unnoticed, but no one pressed for explanation. Small towns understand quiet suffering even when they pretend not to see it. Aloan worked slower than usual, numbers slipping, attention drifting toward the window where rain traced thin, uncertain paths down the glass. Every sound felt sharper, every second longer. 12:43 repeated in her thoughts like a clock she could not stop. By noon the rain ended, leaving the air cold and clean, the kind of silence that follows storms and makes everything feel briefly exposed. She told herself she would not return to the bridge. Told herself distance still meant safety. But fear has gravity, and gravity always pulls toward truth. By late afternoon her steps were already carrying her back toward the river without conscious decision. The streets looked different in post-storm light, colors muted, puddles reflecting fragments of sky. When the bridge appeared again between bare branches, her heartbeat quickened in a rhythm she recognized too well. Closer now. Closer than yesterday. Wind moved softly through the iron rails, producing a low hollow tone that barely counted a sound. She stopped at the entrance, shoes inches from the first metal plate. For a moment she considered turning back, pretending the note had never arrived, pretending memory could still be ignored. But pretending had brought her here in the first place. Slowly, she stepped onto the bridge. The metal felt colder than air, vibration traveling faintly through the soles of her shoes as water moved far below. Halfway across, she stopped. The exact center. The place witnesses kept describing. Silence surrounded her, wide and patient, the same silence from years ago rising like something waking. Her breathing grew shallow. Images pressed forward without permission. Another night. Another storm. Another voice breaking across dark water. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to hold the present together. Then she heard footsteps. Soft. Measured. Approaching from behind. Her body froze before her mind understood. The sound stopped a few feet away. No greeting. No sudden movement. Only shared silence stretching between two people who already knew too much. Aloan did not turn immediately. Some truths feel safer unseen. But she already recognized the presence, the weight of memory carried in human form. When she finally turned, the world seemed to narrow around a single face. Older now. Lines where youth once lived. Eyes holding years that could never be explained in simple words. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Because language fails where history begins. The river moved beneath them, indifferent, carrying reflections that never stayed long enough to matter. At last a voice broke the silence, low and careful, shaped by distance and regret. Not an apology. Not yet. Only her name. Hearing it felt like stepping backward through time, through choices she had tried to bury, through a night she had sworn never to relive. Emotion rose fast, sharp enough to steal breath, but she forced it down, holding control the way she always had. One question escaped anyway. Why now? The answer did not come immediately. Wind passed through the rails again, filling the space where truth hesitated. Finally the voice spoke, quiet but certain. Because the water is giving it back. Confusion flickered across her face, quickly replaced by something closer to dread. She understood what the words suggested. Understood what might have been found. Or what might soon be found. Her pulse thundered in her ears, louder than the river below. Years ago they had both believed silence would hold forever. Believed distance could bury anything. But water remembers. Water returns. She stepped back slightly, the instinct to escape rising too late. "You should not have come here," she whispered. The reply came softer than rain. "I never left." The meaning settled slowly, heavier with each second. Not leaving did not mean staying in town. It meant staying with the past. Staying with the truth. Staying with the night neither of them survived unchanged. Tears threatened, but she refused them. Emotion would weaken the fragile control keeping everything contained. "People will find out," she said. Another pause. Then the quiet answer. "They already have something." Cold spread through her chest, deeper than fear. The note. The sightings. The returning sound. None of it was random. Something was moving beneath the surface of years. Something rising. Footsteps sounded faintly at the far end of the bridge, distant voices carried by afternoon air. Not close enough to hear clearly, but close enough to remind them the world was still there. Time was ending. Whatever truth waited would not stay hidden much longer. Aloan looked toward the water, unable to stop herself. Dark. Slow. Patient. Exactly as she remembered. "If it comes back," she asked quietly, "will they know?" The answer arrived without hesitation. Yes. Silence followed, final and heavy. Because both of them understood what knowing would mean. Not just questions. Not just whispers. Consequences. The distant voices grew slightly louder, approaching step by step. Reality returning. The moment breaking. Aloan's control finally cracked, not in tears, not in sound, but in the smallest visible tremor of her hands. For the first time in 11 months, escape no longer felt possible. Behind them the town continued breathing, unaware of the history standing above dark water. Ahead of them waited a truth already beginning to rise. And somewhere beneath the slow-moving river, something lost long ago was moving closer to the surface. Ready to be seen. Ready to be named. Ready to change everything they believed had stayed buried. The voices at the far end of the bridge drifted closer, carried by damp air and the soft scrape of shoes against metal. Not hurried. Not searching. Just ordinary people finishing an ordinary walk beside the river. Yet to Aloan Pike, the sound felt like a countdown she could not stop. Moments were closing. Choices narrowing. Silence losing the strength it had held for years. She kept her eyes on the water below, afraid that if she looked again at the person beside her, the past would become too real to contain. Wind moved across the surface of the river in slow, uneven lines, bending reflections into shapes that almost looked like movement beneath. Almost. Her breath caught quietly, because memory was no longer the only thing rising. For days the town had felt a change it could not name. A tension without source. A question without words. Now the answer waited only inches below dark water. "You should go," she whispered. The words barely sound at all. Not a command. Not even a request. More like a fragile hope that distance might still protect something. The reply came gently. "It is too late for going." Truth rarely arrives all at once. It seeps. It gathers. And then it stands where no one can ignore it. The approaching footsteps grew clearer, voices separating into laughter and small conversation about weather, about dinner, about nothing that mattered. Ordinary life moving forward, unaware of the fracture opening at the center of the bridge. Aloan felt the tremor return to her hands, stronger now, traveling through her arms, settling deep in her chest. For 11 months she had believed control meant survival. But control was only silence wearing a mask. And silence was ending. A sudden sound broke the air below them. Not loud. Just different. A shift in water. A soft collision against one of the bridge supports. Both of them heard it. Both of them understood. Her heart slammed once, hard enough to hurt. "No," she breathed, the word thin with disbelief. The river answered with another quiet movement. Something unseen touching the surface and drifting back into shadow. The past was no longer waiting. It was arriving. The footsteps behind them slowed slightly as the two distant walkers noticed the figures standing motionless at the bridge center. Curiosity beginning. Attention turning. Time collapsing inward. "You knew this could happen," the quiet voice beside her said. She shook her head once, small and helpless. Knowing is not the same as seeing. And seeing changes everything. Another faint sound rose from the water, followed by silence even deeper than before. The river seemed to hold its breath. Aloan's vision blurred at the edges, not from tears but from memory forcing itself into the present. That night years ago. Rain falling harder than this. Voices raised in fear instead of whispers. A moment where one choice divided two lives forever. She had told herself it was an accident. Told herself survival required leaving. Told herself distance could keep the truth from forming words. But water does not keep promises made in panic. Water returns what it takes. The walkers were close enough now that their conversation had faded into cautious quiet, sensing emotion they did not understand. One of them pulled out a phone, uncertain, watchful. Not yet alarmed, but no longer unaware. Aloan felt the world narrowing to a single unbearable point. "If it surfaces," she asked, voice breaking despite her effort, "what will you say?" A long pause followed. Long enough for regret to fill it completely. The answer came softer than anything before. The truth. Simple words. Impossible weight. Because truth would not divide blame gently. Would not protect the fragile story she had built to keep breathing. Truth would open everything. A shape brushed the surface below, closer to light this time, pale against dark water before slipping back again. One of the walkers gasped softly. The sound carried upward like a signal. Now attention sharpened. Now the moment could not be ignored. Aloan's knees weakened, strength draining as the final wall inside her began to fall. For years she had feared punishment, exposure, judgment, but beneath all of it lived something deeper. The fear that the lost voice from that night had never truly been silent. That the midnight cry had waited inside the river, inside memory, inside her. Waiting to be heard. "I tried to forget," she said, barely able to form the words. "I know," came the answer. Not cruel. Not forgiving. Just true. Siren sounded faintly in the distance. Someone already calling for help without understanding why. Sound traveling across town. Drawing witnesses closer. Pulling the hidden into light. The sky above the river had begun to clear. Late sunlight breaking through clouds in thin pale beams that touched the water like quiet hands. Beautiful. Unforgiving. Everything felt suspended between seconds. Then the river released what it had been holding. Slowly. Gently. Inevitably. A form rose beneath the surface, Not sudden, not violent, just the quiet return of something that had waited long enough. The walkers stepped back in shock, one voice finally shouting for emergency services, words tumbling over fear. Aloan could not move, could not breathe, could only watch as the past she buried crossed the final distance into sight. Years of silence ended without sound. Beside her, the other figure remained still, carrying grief that had never found rest. This was the moment both of them had lived toward without speaking. The moment where memory became real. Where hiding stopped. Where consequence began. Tears finally came to Aloan's eyes, warm and unstoppable, not only for what was lost, but for the years spent pretending loss had not shaped her. "I am sorry," she whispered, the apology too late for anyone who needed it most. The river gave no answer. Sirens grew louder now, urgency filling the air, strangers rushing toward a truth they did not yet understand. In seconds, the bridge would no longer belong to silence. It would belong to questions, to history, to the world beyond memory. Aloan felt something unexpected move through the fear. Not relief, not peace, but the fragile beginning of honesty. Because running had ended, and whatever came next would at least be real. The sunlight widened across the water, touching the surface where darkness had ruled for years. Nothing hidden remains hidden forever. Some truths wait patiently, but they always rise. Sirens reached the bridge in waves of rising sound, red and blue light spilling across iron rails and slow-moving water, turning the quiet river into something restless and exposed. People gathered at a distance first, held back by uncertainty, by the unspoken understanding that something sacred and terrible had surfaced at the same time. Aloan Pike did not step away. Even when voices called for space. Even when footsteps hurried past her. Even when the world she had carefully built began to fall apart in plain daylight. She remained at the center of the bridge, exactly where silence had kept her standing for years without her ever realizing it. The shape in the water drifted gently against the support beam, no struggle left, no motion except what the river allowed. Time felt strange there, stretched thin between past and present, memory and consequence breathing in the same fragile air. Someone covered their mouth in shock. Someone else whispered a prayer they had not spoken in decades. Another person turned away, unable to look at the quiet truth floating just beneath the surface. But Aloan forced herself to see, because looking away had been the first mistake. And she understood now that every silence after that had only deepened the night she tried to escape. Emergency workers moved with careful purpose, their training steady, their voices calm in the way people learn when they must stand close to grief without becoming part of it. Questions began softly. Who found it? Who called? Who was here first? Simple questions with complicated answers. One of the walkers pointed toward the center of the bridge. Toward Aloan. Toward the other still figure beside her. Attention shifted. Not harsh. Not accusing. Just inevitable. Aloan felt the weight of those eyes settle over her shoulders, heavier than fear, heavier than memory. This was the moment she had imagined in quiet nightmares. The moment where truth would finally ask for a voice. For a second her body wanted to run. Muscles tightening with old instinct. Breath shortening with the promise of escape. But there was nowhere left to go. The river had returned what she left behind. And with it returned the part of herself she had refused to name. She stepped forward before anyone could guide her, movement slow but certain, like someone walking into cold water knowing the shock would come. Her voice trembled when she spoke, yet it did not disappear. "I was here," she said. Only 4 words. But they changed the air around her. The nearest officer listened without interruption, expression steady, giving space for whatever truth followed. Years pressed against Aloan's chest, heavy as stone, waiting to be released or buried again. For the first time, she chose release. Her words came slowly, broken in places, shaped more by feeling than perfect memory. She spoke of another storm years ago. Another night filled with fear instead of quiet. An argument that grew too sharp. A step too close to the edge. A moment that could never be taken back. She did not hide behind confusion. Did not soften the edges. Did not protect herself with silence. Because she understood something now that distance had never taught her. Guilt does not fade when buried. It only waits for light. Around her the bridge held every word, iron and wind carrying the sound across water that had listened long before anyone else. Some people cried quietly. Some stood frozen in disbelief. Some simply watched, witnessing the fragile courage of a truth arriving too late and yet exactly when it must. The other figure beside her remained silent, grief written in stillness deeper than language. Not accusing, not forgiving, just present. When Aloan finished speaking, the world did not end. The sky did not darken. The river did not rise. Instead, something quieter happened. Breath returned to her lungs in a way it had not for years. Air felt different, thinner maybe, but honest. Honesty hurt. But it also opened space where silence had lived too long. Officers guided her gently away from the center, not with force, not with judgment, only with the calm understanding that truth requires the next step, whatever that step may be. As she walked, her knees felt weak, yet each movement carried a strange steadiness beneath the fear. Behind her, the bridge no longer felt like a place of hiding. It had become a place of ending. And beginning. Clouds continued to clear overhead, pale blue spreading slowly across the afternoon, sunlight touching rooftops, trees, faces of strangers who would remember this day for the rest of their lives. News would travel. Stories would form. Opinions would rise and fall. That was the nature of towns, of people, of time itself. But beneath all of that noise, something quieter would remain. A moment where silence finally broke. A moment where one voice chose truth instead of distance. Hours later, when the bridge stood empty again and the river returned to its patient movement, the town felt different in a way no one could fully explain. Not safer. Not sadder. Just more awake. Because hidden pain had surfaced, and once seen, it changes the shape of ordinary days. Evening arrived softly, gold light fading into the calm blue of approaching night. Porch lights turned on one by one. Cars passed with familiar sound. Somewhere a screen door closed. Somewhere laughter tried carefully to return. Life continuing, as it always does. Yet the bridge remained in every mind, iron silhouette against dark water, no longer only a crossing between two neighborhoods. Now it was a reminder that the past does not disappear when ignored. That truth waits with quiet patience. That even the longest silence can end with a single trembling voice. Far from the river, inside a quiet room where the future felt uncertain but real, Aloan sat alone and listened to the sound of her own breathing. For the first time in years, the sound did not feel like something she needed to control. It felt like proof she was still here, still capable of choosing what came next. Tears came again, softer now, not only grief, not only regret, but something gentler moving beside them. Relief. Not the relief of escape, but the relief of no longer running. Outside the window, the night settled peacefully over the town, stars faint but steady above rooftops and trees. Somewhere beyond sight, the river continued its endless journey, carrying darkness and light together toward a horizon no one could see. And the bridge stood quiet once more. Not silent with secrets, but quiet with truth. Because the midnight cry that once echoed through empty darkness had finally been heard. And in being heard, it no longer needed to haunt the night. Some stories end with answers. Others end with understanding. This one ended with a simple fragile certainty. That facing the past may break the heart for a moment, but hiding from it breaks the soul for a lifetime. And sometimes, even the quietest voice, spoken at last, is enough to let the morning come again.